All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Art2Life podcast. I'm really, really excited to have a friend and author, Dawson Church, PhD. He's an author of some amazing books we're going to be talking about today. He's a scientist, healing researcher, and I'm looking at my notes here. He's the founder of the National Institute for Integrative Healthcare, which studies and implements evidence-based psychological and medical techniques, offers all kinds of courses that we're going to dive into on such topics as eco-meditation, EFT tapping, and spiritual intelligence. But his book, which is kind of what we're going around today, is called Bliss Brain, the neuroscience of remodeling your brain for resilience, creativity, and joy. Dawson, thanks. Finally, we're doing this. Thanks so much for being here.
Nick, what a pleasure. And if we have half as much fun now that we're recording as we were having before we began recording, it's going to be a fantastic show.
Yeah. It's always like that.
Yes.
You turn the podcast off and then you can't get off the phone. You talk for another 45 minutes. And I'm always like, God, we should have just kept recording, but so the angle, or what I always think about, and, after reading your book and thinking about me selfishly and those listening, how, this idea of creativity and optimizing ourselves for creativity. And I love the word remodeling, which is the neuroscience of remodeling your brain. Maybe just give us a little bit of, what neuroscience is, what's possible here, neuroplasticity, this isn't just luck that we're creative. This is an inside job, and I'm just dying to find out some of the ways I can stay more creative.
Yeah, and the link between our brain function and creativity is really remarkable. The first insights into this happened in the 1960s. So the EEG was invented in the 1920s, and it actually, for the first time, we could read brain waves, and we could see that there were different kinds of brain waves, and they were state dependent. So I go chop wood, and my brain waves look a certain way. I go write an essay, my brain waves look a different way. I talk to a neighbor, my brain waves look a third way. And so we began to notice these brain patterns in the EEG. Healthy people and sick people and people who are flourishing, people who are stressed, have very, very different patterns. And in fact, we can take an EEG readout from somebody and not know their name, their age, a darn thing about them, and we can tell exactly what psychological state they're in. These brain wave signatures are so distinctive. And so in the 1960s, a group of neuroscientists pioneers hooked up the brains of swamis and faith healers and shamans in South America and Pentecostal faith healers in North America and all these interesting people in the spiritual dimensions. And they found they had a highly distinctive brainwave pattern. And when they were in a healing space, when they were in an awakened space, they had this very distinctive pattern in their brains. And it was named the awakened mind pattern, the awakened mind. But in the 70s and 80s, another group of researchers said, what happens if we hook up high performers? Let's hook up that symphony conductor. Let's hook up Pablo Picasso. Let's hook up these people who are in these extraordinary states, who are at their peak athletes, peak surgeons, peak creatives. And they found they had the same pattern, the awakened mind. So either you get there through meditation and spirituality, or you get there through flow and peak performance. Either way, you have that awakened mind pattern. And when you see somebody in that state, think about, a great singer, a great artist, when they're in that state of flow, you can feel it. They're playing. Yeah. Louis Armstrong's playing the trumpet, and you can just see he's in blissful ecstasy. That's flow, and you get there either through creativity or peak performance, or you get there through meditation.
Wow, it's so interesting. Okay, so for those of you listening, we turn these into a video, and I'm wondering, is this universal? Is a Bliss Brain electrographic of a brain in that state gonna look the same for someone in Kenya as it does for somebody on the other side of the world? Different, it doesn't matter. So
Doesn't
these
matter.
are universal patterns that we all have or are in or can be in.
Universal patterns, and they look
Wow.
like a lot of alpha. So we've heard about alpha waves, and
Yeah.
the purpose of biofeedback, neurofeedback is to train your brain to produce alpha. And so what these look like usually is a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere pattern, and then the size of each brainwave. And alpha is right in the middle of the band. So the slow waves are delta and theta. We're in delta most of the night when we're sleeping. We emerge into theta, a slightly faster pattern, when we're in rapid eye movement, vivid dream sleep. So theta and delta are the main waves of sleep. They're also the main waves of trance. They're also the main waves of super learning. And they're also the main waves from 0 to 5 years old. Before we're 5, we have very little alpha or anything faster than that. Our brains are in this slow, deep, super learning trance where if you stick that 3-year-old into a village where they speak 7 languages, the 3-year-old will learn all 7 languages simultaneously and retain that memory throughout their adult lives. So we are in this incredible space of being able to soak up all this information in that slow theta delta state, like dreams and like super learning when we're really young. Then we develop alpha around the age of 5. We develop beta, and beta is the fast brainwave characteristic of conscious thought. In everyday interactions, we're in beta most of the time. And then at the very top of the range, there's gamma. And gamma is characteristic of compassion, insight, creative brilliance. People who have brilliant flashes of insight, their brains will put out bursts of gamma. And some meditators are putting out 25 times the gamma of ordinary people. So they're extraordinarily, they have, this is the brainwave of gratitude, compassion, bliss, altruism. All those positive emotions are linked to the brain's production of gamma. And that's exactly what the awakened mind looks like. It's some base of theta and delta, tons of alpha waves, very small amount of beta, because we're still thinking, we're still aware, we're still conscious, and then lots and lots of gamma. And that's regardless whether it's a Kenyan sheep herder looking at the moon and admiring the beauty of the landscape, or whether it's somebody in the orangerie in France staring at Monet's amazing whole room of water lilies. So yeah, it's this universal pattern. We find it everywhere.
It's so incredible because you now have almost like it's a KPI to your life. I mean, these are indicators, right? Like I think I feel good or I felt good, but now you could actually track it. It's so incredibly interesting. And did you say that the thinking is that more like the ego and just the getting stuff done? I bet I'm going to be late, I'm stressed out, I got to pick up the dry cleaners. Is that the theta or beta? I wasn't sure.
Beta. It's high beta, and stress is enormously high beta. Like I watched a session done by a dear psychologist friend of mine on stage in France. He was working with a woman who'd been sexually molested as a child, and when she thought about that, her beta took over everything. All the other brain waves shrunk to almost 0. So huge amounts of beta, and we can just see it right there on the EEG. When he treated her, he was using EFT tapping. When he treated her, she later on, in about 20 minutes, was able to think about that same event from her childhood. Just no change in the actual objective reality. Her beta had shrunk down to normal. So when we heal, that shifts. Highly creative people literally produce a field around them. My wife Christine, when she's painting, now she's not always in flow when she's painting, but she's in flow most of the time. She's been painting for, like, it takes her, I found, 20, 30, 40 minutes to drop into that. And it takes meditators about the same time to drop into that awakened mind pattern. But when Christine's painting, Nick, I will tiptoe by her because I can tell she's in flow from 20 or 30 feet away. Her feel her energy field. And these energy fields are measurable. We can measure the brain's energy field and the heart's energy field far beyond the confines of the physical body. And you can literally feel that creativity. Just she's in this creative flow. And I don't even want to say anything to interrupt this beautiful space, because I can tell she's right there and she's bringing forth this amazing art.
Wow. And so creativity, and you're talking about high performers, learning capabilities. I mean, creativity is really problem solving, actually. We think about creativity as like, oh, something's just made, but it is about learning. It's about noticing. It's about holding wonder and curiosity. I mean, is it all the pieces of creativity that is it all like meditation and gratitude? Is that all part of creativity then? Or is creativity kind of coming in and in a different wave form? Or
Well, I know meditation and creativity is intricately linked, and I don't write. Like, I write science books, and science books are hard to write. Like, if you write a novel, if you write an inspirational book, I can crank out a chapter of an inspirational book in a day. If I write a chapter of a science book, if I can do it in a month, that's fast. You have to read the papers, often hundreds of scientific papers written by people who have IQs way beyond, like 50 points above mine, and then I have to rewrite their material accurately in a way that explains it to people with an IQ 50 points below mine. I mean, this is a really hard job if you're a science writer. And I meditate in the morning. I'll usually meditate if I'm writing for about 2 hours before I start writing. Then I'm totally in that flow state. That's what we call these states, flow states. Meditative state, eyes open, is flow. But now you're in flow, and several things happen. One is synchronicity. There's a huge meditation review published in a top-tier journal showing that meditators have more synchronicity. They have more of every kind of anomalous experience, clairvoyance, clairsentience, all kinds of anomalous experiences happen much more often to meditators than non-meditators. So they're in this zone where they're putting things together. The other thing that happens in the brain of a creative is something called binding. And if you go and look at the research on binding, it's kind of a weird term in neuroscience, but what it means is that you are able to bind together disparate bits of information which might appear unrelated in a way that explains them to people. And so, like, one day I was writing one of my books, and I was trying to give people a analogy for energy versus matter. Like, if you have, for example, certain diseases, for instance, you need to have some kind of mechanical intervention for them, and that can be effective. But energy interventions are incredibly effective for both physical and psychological issues. So I was trying to find an analogy for how you could use energy to affect matter. You can use matter to affect matter and energy to affect matter. So here my brain is working on this problem, and I can't find a good analogy. I'm wrestling with this in my book, and I'm wandering outside to my car. As I do this, I had a rental car at a hotel. I'm walking out to the car, and I grab my car keys, and there's of course a mechanical key that goes in the lock, and there's also a clicker. So I click the clicker, it unlocks the car, and suddenly I realized, bam, there's my analogy. Energy from the clicker could unlock the car at a distance of 100 feet. Or I could walk up to the car, insert the key in the lock, and turn it. Now I have my analogy for my book from a totally unrelated field, renting a car, driving a car.
Yes.
I apply now to the whole argument of energy versus matter interventions. And that's binding, when the brain is grabbing things from all kinds of different parts of your life, your experience, and putting them together in this creative whole.
Yeah.
And that's what creatives are really good at.
Yeah, putting things together in new and different ways that we haven't seen or experienced. And that is, because we have all the same things in this world, but it's the combinations, and it's how we think of it. And I mean, writing is that, right? Slogans is that, color is that. It's so interesting. I had an injury, an Achilles injury, and and long story short, I had to have an operation, and I did, and it was very painful, and it took 2 months, and I was on crutches and everything. And they went in and they sewed the Achilles tendon back together and cleared out the swelling and took the bone down and everything. And then the same thing happened to the other side about a year later. And they said it would. They said, you do all this running and you got this funny, your heels are a little weird and you're going to get this thing. And it's called Hageland's deformity. It's this sort of bursitis bump thing. And sure enough, the next one started to do it. But this time I went to a different surgeon and he said, before you do the surgery, before I do it, and I can do it, we make sure that everyone goes through this. It's this shockwave therapy. Basically it's like a sound energy. But it's very strong. And he goes, we just make sure everyone does it because about 80% of the time it heals it. And I'm just thinking, there's no way. I mean,
energy is better.
So swollen, and so I go there, and I wasn't going to do it, but he said, we force people to do it. It's only $400. It's 3 visits, 10 minutes each. You got to come down here and we'll do it. And if it's still not a problem, we'll do the surgery. Anyway, long story short, I go and I do this. And it was so interesting because the first time, I mean, my heel is really red. I'm not even walking that well. And I said, well, listen, I'll stop running. And he goes, no, you don't need to stop running at all here. We'll just do this. Just keep doing what you're normally doing. I couldn't believe it. And it ended up healing. It ended up reducing the swelling. It took about 4 or 5 months, but it was 4 visits, 10 minutes each. And I realized that this is just energy healing. I mean, I don't, we all can like feel energy, and there's lots of woo-woo things around, but this was just unbelievable to me that, instead of going in and breaking the bone and using, energy to heal something. And someone was saying that, the reason that we don't use this a lot is it's hard to make, companies to make money of this. It's much better to like use surgery, but I guess these machines are pretty expensive and all kinds of doctors are getting them, but I just couldn't believe it, and so I'm a real big believer in the power of energy. And, what you were saying about synchronicity, when you are, in a certain wavelength and a certain frequency, I know that this comes when you're on track with your art, when you're doing things that bring you alive, when you're in flow. I call it a tailwind. I mean, I even got a name for this thing because it's what I set up to help people. This is how I coach people. I use that thing that you're talking about where, there's and I want you to talk about this a little bit more because I just know from experience that when people are moving towards what brings them alive, that is more aligned, more incongruent, other things cross their path, more opportunities, more tailwind to life. What is that, and how do you describe it? And it relates a lot to the field. Like we're all part of an energy field, but that's kind of as far as I've gotten with it. And I'd love to, you're the man that would, you brought it up, which I can't believe. But what exactly are we talking about here?
I wrote a chapter on synchronicity for my book, Mind to Matter. And when I was originally planning the book out, I was really curious about this phenomenon. To what extent do our thoughts affect reality? And Mind to Matter began as an attempt to provide a rigorous scientific answer to that question. To what degree does hard science, show us that our minds actually create reality? And in some ways, it does this all the time. If I get stressed, my body produces cortisol. So by psychological stress, by a mental and emotional process that has nothing to do with any material reality, I'm producing the material reality of a molecule called cortisol. So I knew that we could show that mind creates matter in some simple ways like that. But I thought I should mention synchronicity and have a chapter on this in the book as well, in terms of these effects outside the body. And I thought it'll be a very short chapter. I'll quote Carl Jung. I'll mention some of the ideas about synchronicity, and that'll be it. It turned out to be the longest chapter in the book. And the amount of science there is behind phenomena like synchronicity is absolutely remarkable. And one experiment of many, many experiments really sums it all up. The researchers hooked up people to heart rate variability monitors, which measure this measure of health called heart rate variability, the interval between heartbeats. It's a general measure of your well-being. And so they measured this in volunteers for a month. And these people were centered. They were usually very calm. They were experienced meditators. They had really mastered the art of having a good rate of heart rate variability in a sustained way. So they plot all of their heart rate variability changes over the course of a month. And you see these kind of squiggles on a graph as their heart rate variability changes over 30 days. The next graph is solar activity, sunspots. And they measured sunspots, the activity of the sun, because the sun doesn't just blaze at a uniform rate. There are sunspots, and some days there's much more solar activity than others. This produces a solar wind, which blows past the Earth at about 2 million miles an hour and distorts the whole electromagnetic field of the Earth. And there's some beautiful NASA images of it's called the Earth's field and the field line resonances. So these researchers measured all this stuff, and then they overlay the two graphs. What you see is they look exactly the same. Individual human heart rate variability is tracking cosmic cycles like sunspots, which in turn are being driven by other forces at the scale of a galaxy, or perhaps bigger than a galaxy. So we truly are in tune with the universe in certain ways. And not only that, I point out in Mind to Matter, when you are in tune in that way, you are in tune with everyone else who's in tune. That's why you think of a friend you haven't seen for 15 years and they phone you. I mean, I had this experience this last month. I think it was crazy. I had a teacher of Gestalt therapy called Brad Blanton. And I did a lot of Gestalt therapy classes with Brad in the 1990s, and then lost track of him for about 20 years. And at a workshop of mine a month ago, one of the people walked up and said, I first learned of you when you were taking those Gestalt therapy workshops with Brad Blanton in the 90s. How's Brad doing? And I said, I lost track of Brad 20 years ago. I have no idea. I went back to my hotel room that afternoon, opened my laptop, and up pops an email from Brad Blanton.
Yeah.
I'm getting chills as I think about this. There are so many stories like this. People get the healing information they need. People get the intuitive information they need. So there are cycles that are linking us to huge cosmic forces and to each other that we're not aware of at the level of consciousness. But when you're in tune with nature, when you're in tune with your own biological rhythms, you start to be just generally in tune with life.
And I think of everything through the lens of being in flow around making something, when something is or what we're doing, what you're creating, whether it's a pot of soup or a book or a painting, is it for us to become, more in flow and to drop into those universal wavelengths like that? Is it because we're doing what we should be doing? I mean, like if I was doing a job that was just killing me, I wouldn't ever be in flow. I'd just be frustrated, right? So that's obvious to me. But for those listening, like, what are some ways that we can stay more in this flow, more in these rhythms that are in nature around us, so we can connect more with others and just be here in more congruence?
Well, in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, a text that's more than 2,000 years old and part of a living tradition that's thousands of years older than 2,000 years old, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are one of the many of the meditators' guides to this. And Patanjali just says practice. just practicing. Now, you need to practice effectively, because just practicing badly or ineffectively is just going to make you better at bad practice. So you want to use a science-based meditation. So I developed one called eco meditation, which millions of people all over the world use. I put it up on the web free about 15 years ago, and it just spread to every corner of the globe. There's just people all over the world using eco meditation now. And you just look it up online, ECO meditations all over the place. There are people making recordings of it and putting music to it. And it just become like this thing. But it's a science-based meditation. So make sure you meditate effectively. And it's very, very simple. You breathe at a certain rhythm, you relax certain muscles of your body, and you just do these simple things, and suddenly you're deep. You're in this deep state. So you need to meditate effectively. And Patanjali says, so that's the contribution of neuroscience, is showing us how to do these things effectively. The contribution of a great text like the Yoga Sutras is this living tradition of how you reach these awakened states. And Patanjali says, practice, do it. And I advocate being uncompromising about practice. People wake up in the morning, they've set their alarm to meditate an hour earlier, and they hit snooze. Don't do that. If you make that commitment, meditate. Meditate if you made the commitment, and do it every single day. So that's the one thing. Practice is going to do it. And everyone has these states occasionally. Like we're all going to see that beautiful sunset. We'll all pick up a baby maybe sometime in our lives and get there, or we'll hold a partner, we'll make love, we will have some sort of peak experience, and suddenly we're there for a moment. The smart people among us say, how can I do it again? And how can I do it every day? And how can I habituate my whole body to that? And that's what my book, Bliss Brain, is all about. And so it's the training process of making that state your new normal. The Sufis called those initial moments of ecstasy glimpses of heaven. So we have these glimpses of heaven, but how do you make them a regular part of your life? And that's where science comes in. So consistency, like Patanjali said, just meditate every single day, not necessarily for an hour or two, but 15, 20 minutes, that's enough to move the needle. I did one MRI study with people looking at their brain states before and after 1 month of eco meditation. And after 1 month, their brains showed substantial anatomical and functional change in only 30 days. And the part of the brain that is the seat of suffering, the main part of the brain that makes us suffer, it's called the mid-prefrontal cortex. It's right over here behind our eyebrows. And that's where we obsess about bad things from the past, potential bad things from the future. And we also build our sense of self. People who are depressed, who are lonely, who are anxious, who have traumatic stress, they're very self-absorbed. And what happens in meditators, what happens in monks, for example, is the mid-prefrontal cortex is quiet. In patients with major depressive disorder, the mid-prefrontal cortex is loud and noisy. They're thinking all the time. They're obsessing, they're ruminating, they're very self-focused. And so we want to calm that part of the brain down. And my MRI research showed that after only a month, the mid-prefrontal cortex was much, much quieter than before. And the part of the brain that lit up and was much more active was the insula, which handles gratitude and joy and awe and altruism and compassion. That part of the brain was lit up like a Christmas tree, even when people weren't meditating. So that's what practice will do. So you have these initial glimpses of heaven, as the Sufis call them, and then you cultivate them with that consistent daily meditation. And now in a month of using a neuroscientifically sound meditation, your brain has begun remodeling itself, and you start to feel immensely better, much more creative, much more resilient. Keep it up past a month, for 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. You have radical shifts in the way your brain functions and the way you feel. So it's that doing it every day, that consistent practice that's going to put you in that creative space. You sustain it. After a while, you don't even bother closing your eyes. You sit there, your eyes are wide open. Sometimes you're sitting there in traffic. You're waiting in line at the grocery store, eyes wide open, and you're in this absolute ecstasy. That's when these changes have become so pervasive in your brain that you're able to sustain them when you aren't meditating, and even when you're in times of crisis. So consistency is the key. Meditation is a great way to get into it. Sustain that initially for a while, 2, 3, 4 hours. Then eventually it becomes your new normal.
Wow. Yeah. How long is your practice, for example? I mean, you're literally saying like 15 or 20 minutes can make a huge difference, and your brain is actually, it's rewiring. It's changing. It's changing, right? That's neuroplasticity. It's why does it change? I mean, why does it want to become an optimized? I mean, it can change the other way, right? I mean, it's completely, we're in control here, right? I mean,
Well, the speed of change is astonishing. Like that study I mentioned, where people's anatomy changed, where that suffering part of the brain, the mid prefrontal cortex, was quiet, and the insula, the happy part, was really active. That was only a month. 1 month, people's brains had changed so much that in an MRI, we could see the differences in their brain function. So it doesn't take long. And they were doing eco meditation 22 minutes a day. So it was not a lot of time that it took to do that. And yeah,
yeah.
your brain does change quickly. I have one image in my book, Bliss Brain, of an electron microscope scan showing two neurons at the opposite ends of the frame, and they're twitching. So these two neurons and their synapses are twitching a little bit because they're signaling together in real time. Very high magnification, and they twitch and twitch and twitch, and you see them twitching and twitching and twitching more. And eventually, after a while, you see them touching, and eventually they intertwine. They've gone from firing to wiring. And then you look at the timestamps on the images, 12 seconds. Took 12 seconds to go firing to hard wiring those neurons. So if you're spending 12 seconds, 24 seconds, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 12 minutes, 25 minutes in that state, and you're wiring all this stuff together, you are and you're firing the circuits of creativity and joy and bliss and resilience. You have a very, very different brain after just a short while. If you're firing the circuits of disorganization, of anger, of adverse experiences, of negative emotion, those circuits are the ones that are firing and then wiring together and becoming more robust. And that's the unfortunate result of a mind that is just not being brought into the state of joy. So you are doing the firing and wiring. Either way, you may as well make it that.
Wow. Yeah. So that's what I meant. It's we get to decide what we're making here, this brain, right? Amazing. That's just incredible. I know that part of the book was you were going through some challenges when you were writing the book, and I think it's really interesting, the fires and some health issues. Can you speak a bit about how this mental state and with challenges and how you used it and what happened? I know it wasn't planned that you were doing this book when this occurred, but I know it added a lot to the book, and I'm just curious.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't planned. I just finished Mind to Matter, and in 2017, I'd finished the book finally, and it was uploaded to the cloud and was like ready to go to the publisher. And then in October of that year, my wife and I were involved in a wildfire. Our house burned down unexpectedly. She woke me at 12:45 a.m. I looked out the window. There was a glow on the horizon. I dashed outside, and this wildfire was just sweeping toward the house.
Oh
and
my God.
we had to like grab our car keys and sprint for the car and just made it. And I mean, trees are bursting into flame around us. It was crazy. And it took us, we just drove very, very fast out of there until we reached safety. And a lot of people died that night. A lot of 5,000 homes were destroyed. It was an epic disaster, a huge, huge wildfire. And so we suddenly found ourselves losing absolutely everything. Our office burned down, our home burned down, and we literally had nothing except the clothes we had left there with and the car. And so we were dislocated for a while, psychologically and physically. And then I had some health problems. I'd injured myself trying to deal with the fire residue, and then we had a total financial crash. Our office burned down. We lost all of our records. It was just a financial nightmare for the next couple of years. So all of these stressors. And Nick, I'd meditate in the morning, and I'd write my journal afterwards about how prosperous I felt, and about how abundant my life was, and how grateful I was. And I would be in this absolutely ecstatic state. And I thought, what's going on here? What's happening in my brain? So I began to read this research on this really exciting new field of endocannabinoids and the endocannabinoid system. And they're called cannabinoids like marijuana because the molecules echo the effects of THC, which is the active molecule in marijuana. And it turns out that our brains have receptors for these molecules. And when we meditate effectively, our brains and our bodies produce tidal waves of these pleasure molecules like serotonin, for example. Serotonin has the same molecular structure as psilocybin, magic mushrooms. And now I guide people in meditation sometimes. We juice up their serotonin, and they start having hallucinations, really pleasant, beautiful hallucinations. And they start to see magic crystal fountains and colors and shapes and all these beautiful things under the effect of the serotonin in their brains, purely organically, by meditation. We do a dopamine meditation, and dopamine is the molecule of addiction. It's the molecule that cocaine and heroin produce. But if you meditate correctly, your dopamine can rise by more than 50%. Now they're getting this heroin-like slug of energy, and it energizes them. And then they do oxytocin. We have them practice meditation in a way that unlocks the production of oxytocin in their bodies. And suddenly they're feeling all this infinite, boundless love. And eventually they hit this molecule called anandamide. And anandamide is called a bliss molecule, recently discovered, part of the endocannabinoid system, but it just puts us into this absolute ecstasy. And I was sitting there after the fire meditating in those months in a borrowed car and rented house and clothes from the homeless shelter. And I was just sitting there in absolute ecstasy with my brain awash in anandamide. Then I thought, okay, got to write a book about this.
Yeah.
So I wrote Bliss Brain and explained the whole thing in terms that anyone can understand and can do themselves.
Yes. Yeah. That is so amazing. And when you walk around the planet, you must, much of what you study, you can't see, right, with the naked eye. What you're talking about, your wife making art, and she's, you can feel the energy fields. And that's so, when we make art, I coach, and it's something that I've been aware of, where I am energetically, where the fire is in me, the intention, the willingness for me to really be in it completely changes the outcome of what I make. And other people can feel it. They can't see it, but they just can feel it in the work. I mean, that's what's so fascinating, that we have this, it's almost like your brain photos. You have a piece of art that if we want to make amazing art, if we want to make incredible art that connects to other people, it's almost like it too has to be, made of that kind of frequency and that energetic state, and others will be drawn to it. They don't know why, but they'll just choose that one. It's so interesting. But it's not something you can see, but you can just feel it. I can look at someone's art, and generally I can tell if they're self-conscious. I can tell if they're just feeling free. It's really interesting to have a physical thing that we can see. I'm so visual. And I think that's why this is also interesting to me, because you have visual markers for this now. It's not something that I've seen it in the book and everything, but do you, when you walk around, how do you think of, are you aware of, when you go to the grocery store, people's energies and how you're feeling? You just must be so in tune to that. And I'm just curious.
Well, there is a whole group of people who are classified as highly sensitive temperaments. And many artists actually are in that category.
Yeah.
Many eaters are as well. And they're much more sensitive to energies than the average person. And so I'm one of them. And so for those highly sensitive temperaments, or what they're called HSTs in research, they need to learn a few things. One of them is to take care of their own energy inside of their energy ecosystem. And so that means really taking care of yourself and actually having very firm boundaries. Like when I go into a big box store like a Home Depot or a Costco or a Walmart or something, it's literally, now before I learned this, I'd go to Macy's on Fifth Avenue in New York, and I would get like sick for 2 or 3 days afterwards. I didn't understand this in my 20s, that energies could affect me so badly, but they did. And now I've learned these ways of drawing that energy boundary, and I can go in there and be fine. But I use energy exercises to prepare myself and go to the big box store and maintain the bubble around me. My wife and I went to an art class, Nick. A few years ago, we were doing a retreat in Hawaii with a bunch of people who signed up to be with us. Part of it, which was teaching a mandala class. And Christine, my wife, has taught art for many, many years to children, but had never really taught adults and never taught a mandala. So we thought, well, we'll find one of the best mandala teachers around and go take a one-day class with her. And we did. And so we were very excited. She uses Prismacolor pencils, which you can blend, usually on black paper. And so we got to the class. It was a big round table, maybe 20 people around the table, big studio, and then all these gorgeous mandalas on the walls all around us that people had created out of Prismacolor pencils. And we were so excited to hear her talk about the theory, and that she had us do some blending exercises. And we were so jazzed. And then, Nick, the teacher said, and now it's time for each of you to do your own mandala. And we were just so excited, but we became very aware that we were the only 2 people in the room who were, because all the other people in the room said things like, I could never do one as good as hers. I have no idea what to draw. You're getting into your left brain, you're getting into your thinking, you're getting back into your personality, which is full of misery and confusion. And so people were verbalizing all this stuff. For us, it was like being in a toxic stew of thought. So we threw up what we call our bubble, the Dawson and Christine bubble around us. And we just said, we're just going to be in this little bubble all by ourselves. And we're going to insulate ourselves from everyone else here and all their negative self-talk. And we're going to be in our energy of enthusiasm and joy. And so you can learn to do that. We live in a world where there are all kinds of random energies around, and they're going to affect you if you are energy sensitive, and they're going to impede your creativity if you're creative. And so you have to learn to put up that bubble, meditate before you begin, really adjust your mindset so it's positive, dispel and release any impeding energies in your body. And you can do that through tapping, do it through meditation. There are various physical ways of releasing energy really, really quickly, balancing your own internal energy, and then you find creativity flows.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great way. When you were describing the personality, the part of the brain you use when you're doing errands and you're stressed out, when that enters the art making process, I don't even call it art making anymore, and it's like, it gives art a bad rap because we think that that's what it is, comparing ourselves and but that isn't making art. It's a thing that can happen and we can slip into it, but that's really interesting. Yeah.
And so you have to train yourself, and the things you can do to induce these flow states. So meditation at the start of a day is one. Novelty is another one. Expose your brain to novelty. Novelty is a flow trigger. I don't run like you do, but I mountain bike every day, usually twice a day. And I know if I take a different route, I'll even do the same route backwards, or I'll take a little bit of a different loop, or I'll try one part of it a little bit faster, or riding on the edge of the trail where it's a little bit harder. So again, just introducing a little bit of novelty. Now, you don't introduce a lot of novelty. Don't try and learn Spanish, French, Greek, and Swahili at the same time. You'll just go to overload, and you'll produce so much beta that you'll just get stressed. So to be in flow, to drop yourself into alpha, you want a little bit of challenge, novelty, but not so much that it becomes threatening to the brain. And so these are all flow triggers. And when you know what they are, you can deliberately introduce them into your day. And I do those, and then I write off that. So only when I'm in that state do I write. But when I'm in that state and I write, Nick, I swear I read my own books later on. I think, who wrote this? They're clearly being written by somebody a lot smarter than I am, because you're hooking into these transcendent, this universal consciousness, which has answers, has wisdoms, has creativity, has all kinds of resources that we in our limited local minds don't have. And so that's entering that non-local mind consciousness of the universe. From there, you have access to all of these resources, and you put yourself there in flow.
I think of it, I love how you describe it, the local mind. It's almost like, it's like the non-local mind is Google. I mean, we actually have, you can ask a question and it can go find information in every law library and in all parts of the world. And, it's this bigger wisdom, consciousness, higher level that we can tap into. And I relate to that totally. I find that for me, to stop me, to get me out of my local mind, and I too talk about novelty. And it's so interesting because I've never really even thought of using that word, but I describe it as differences. When we experience new and different things, we get juiced, we feel alive. Like our soul loves that. We love to taste new things. And I agree, you don't want to just have, a traumatic experience, but what I do to get into this state, and it's a form of meditation, is I just play in the beginning stages of my art making, no matter what I'm doing. I just let go of outcome entirely, and I become like a 4-year-old, and about 20 or 30, I am in a flow state, and I can start make like amazing things come out of it. Like this is a strategy for making incredibly sophisticated work. I mean, that's so interesting that you're saying the same thing. How to get out of that local mind. I mean, it's so small. Our brains are so small if it's just ours,
Yeah, we do have access to other levels of mind. And you realize when some great artists were creating, they definitely had access to extraordinary levels of perspective that ordinary people don't have. Read great poetry like Rumi. You read Rumi and you realize he was having a non-ordinary experience, an inspired, listen to Finlandia by Sibelius, and you realize, or Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, you realize that these people were touching the divine. Bach, I think, went there routinely and was able to download. And then there are modern masters as well who have access to these extraordinary states. And we find that they are extraordinary brain states. We measure them. We can now see which areas of the brain are lit up. We can measure the hormones and neurotransmitters of these states. We can measure the brainwaves of these states. And the cool thing is, with science, is we can now train people to get there. It doesn't take a long time. Like I had people at one retreat for a week. We had a team of neuroscientists there, hooking them all up, about 30 people to EEGs before, at the start of the week, measuring their brain function. At the end of the week, we measured it again, and they had far more flow at the end of a week of meditation than before. So we can train people, and it does not take 10,000 hours, does not take going into the monastery and renouncing all your worldly goods. It can be done in a regular modern life. You can train yourself to enter these states, and when you do it, and again, fire those neurons repeatedly, you wire them, and that's just you. After a while, you are naturally creative. You go from being an occasional creator to being a highly creative person who, whatever task comes before you, you're bringing your ability to do that binding, to do that insight have those gamma waves of flashing insight, and you bring that to every task in your life, whether it's parenting or your relationships or your money or your art. So it starts to pervade your whole life, and your whole life just seems to be smoother and easier. We interview people who are taking our consciousness programs in my organization, and they say, the days I didn't meditate were bumpy, and the ones I did meditate were noticeably smoother, and your whole life just kind of smooths out. Your life isn't perfect. You still have a fire, fire. If there's a fire sweeping through the neighborhood, you have to deal with that as well, or divorce or money stuff. But your whole life is lived in a sense of synchrony, and you find you have all these non-local resources you otherwise wouldn't be in touch with, which makes your local life a lot easier and more pleasurable.
This is so amazing. You do a lot of work, around the tapping, and can you go into that just for folks who never have heard of this, what it is, why it works? Just give us I don't want to miss this because I think it's so interesting.
Yeah, and so meditation is additive. It's adding something to your day. It's adding serenity. It's adding equanimity. It's adding joy. It's opening the portal to grace. That's powerful. EFT is subtractive, and what EFT is subtracting is stress. And so many of our interactions, many areas of our lives that are difficult, stress is a part of them. Almost all disease is linked to stress. In fact, the term stress was coined by a doctor who wanted to find a word for the malady common to all the patients in the hospital. And that was the term he used, was stress. He said whether they're here for cancer or heart disease, they're something, and that something, the term he came up with was stress. And so EFT is subtractive. It'll remove your stress, and it does it by balancing your acupuncture meridians. These are flows of energy. They're very easily measurable by modern instrumentation. And there are these energy flows in your body. When you have acupuncture treatments, the acupuncturist puts in a needle that restores energy flow in that acupuncture meridian. When you use tapping, you're simply tapping on these meridians, and tapping on them also is smoothing out those energy flows. So we'll take people who are absolutely frantic, who are having a panic attack, and we'll tap with them, and they just get calm within a few moments usually. It's really remarkable how quickly EFT does it, again, working on the energy level rather than the physical. Like I was in Hawaii last year with a friend, and actually a couple, and we noticed that the woman in the couple wasn't really swimming in the water. She was wading into like her knees, and then that was it. And we talked to her, and she said, "Oh, I've never been able to go into water deeper than me. I just can't go in there. Can't go in any deeper." So all of us were splashing around and snorkeling and swimming, and she was just wading in the water. So I said, well, "Let's do some tapping." And we went out. We just sat on the bench in the beach, and we tapped, and we imagined her worst fears. Actually, with tapping, you don't try and make it better. You actually try and make it worse. You light up all those negative channels, those neural pathways in the brain, and when they're active, you then counteract them. It's called counter conditioning in psychology. You counter condition them by tapping. We did that with her around the water. Within about 20 minutes, she was happily splashing around and snorkeling with everybody else. So it works really, really fast. We have teams now in Ukraine with the Ukraine war, training Ukrainian psychologists to use it. We do it in the Veterans Administration in the US. We're an approved therapy. EFT is really good at, again, subtracting stress. So add meditation, use EFT to subtract the stress from your life.
Wow, that is just amazing. I found it particularly accessible, and I don't know if this will make sense to you, but we're good at doing something, and there's and that tapping, it kind of calms you because you're doing something, and then there's sort of a tranquility in that. It's odd, but it's very accessible. From my experience, it's like it's much easier for me than turning off my monkey brain when I'm trying to meditate. I moments when I'm meditating, but that's more.
Yes.
It's almost intuitive.
Yeah. So both practices. I mean, it's something meditation sets you up for a good day in the morning, but then there's traffic, there are emails, there are pressures of life, there's money, there are people, and so that's when you tap to reduce that stress and get yourself back to that peaceful frame of mind.
Yeah. Wow. That's just that's incredible, Dawson. If somebody, so your recommendation for folks listening, we'll have this to access you and this meditation, the DawsonGift.com. These are downloads. Is this where they can get that eco meditation? Because I think that's what's on the front and center of everyone's mind right now. Can they access that?
Yeah, they get a eco meditation track at DawsonGift.com and the EFT mini manual, and it has EFT on a page at the very end. The eco meditation track there is great too, because in one series of studies, we found that doing these things produces a drop in your cortisol. And when your cortisol drops, this is your baseline cortisol. So people's baseline stress drops substantially with EFT meditation. But in one study, we found that your immunity to viruses, bacteria, environmental toxins rises enormously when you do them. And so that meditation is geared to high immunity.
Wow. Fantastic. Dawson, thank you so much for being here. I think I want to do some experiments here and then have you come back and more about this. It's so exciting.
Yeah, try it out and see. And again, see how you can induce that flow state, do it regularly, start rewiring your brain in even greater amounts. I mean, you're already a highly creative person, but what if you can sustain those states for long periods of time?
I meditate, but when you said, you can do something poorly over and over again.
Yes.
So my own thing. I have the discipline, but I think maybe I could learn something, doing it in a higher, more, just a better way, so I'm excited. Anyway,
you need technique as well. Discipline is important. And then the technique, it's like, your form when you're doing a sport, your form is important. So that's where it's worth bringing in a science-based type of meditation.
Fantastic. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much, Dawson, and everybody. If you have a question or thoughts about this, you can go to the Art2Life.com podcast section. We've got that little yellow bar on the right, and you can leave a comment or a question there. Seriously, I think this is such a fascinating subject. I want to dive more into it, and gathering questions would be helpful for me to sort of understand where we might go in another conversation. I know that this subject is a big one for everyone listening here, because we've had you're familiar with Your Brain on Art, Ivy Ross and Susan Magnuson. We had them on.
I love the book. Yeah.
So this is related totally. And again, thanks so much. Again, there's show notes. Check out the links. And Dawson, I will hopefully see you soon before you take off to Hawaii.
Thanks. I look forward to that. Thanks for having me. Appreciate that.
Okay.